It was the meeting David had both anticipated and dreaded for our entire 2-year relationship. His father was a figure of legend in the financial world, a self-made billionaire who had withdrawn from public life a decade earlier to live in seclusion on his vast estate. Known for his brilliance and his temper, Arthur Sterling was said to be nearly impossible to please. He had even disowned his eldest son for marrying someone he disapproved of. Now, it was my turn to be judged. The week leading up to the dinner was filled with tension. David, normally calm and composed, was a wreck. "Ava, you don't understand," he kept saying. "This isn't a normal meet the parents. My father doesn't do normal. Everything with him is a test. Our entire future depends on this." He gave me a list of strict rules. Avoid talking about my nonprofit job. He saw charity as weakness. Don't mention my modest family background. Stick to topics like art, history, or economics. Wear the navy dress he picked and the cashmere scarf. Appearances mattered to his father. And above all else, do not be late. He warned me that Arthur Sterling saw tardiness as a sign of chaos and lack of discipline. The morning of the dinner, I felt like I was preparing for an interview rather than meeting family. I rehearsed conversation topics in the mirror, pressed my dress and scarf until they were flawless, and tried to calm my nerves. I was so focused on following the rules that I almost forgot to be myself. I decided to take the train to his father's town, a wealthy enclave about an hour from the city. David had gone ahead to prepare, and I was to take a taxi from the station to the estate. But when I stepped off the train, the pressure of the day became overwhelming. I needed air. So instead of taking a cab, I decided to walk. It was just over a mile, and I thought the quiet would help clear my head. The walk felt like stepping into another world. The streets were lined with enormous homes hidden behind tall hedges and iron gates. I felt like an outsider in a land of privilege. When I checked my watch, I realized I had 20 minutes left, just enough time. That's when I saw him. An older man sat on a park bench beside a perfectly trimmed lawn. His clothes were worn, and his hands trembled slightly in the cold. His face was tired, his eyes distant. He looked utterly out of place in this world of perfection. My first instinct, shaped by David's endless warnings, was to keep walking. Don't get involved. Don't be late. Don't ruin this. But then I saw the sadness in his eyes, and I remembered something my grandmother once told me. The measure of your character is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you. I turned toward him. "Excuse me, sir," I said gently. "Are you all right?" He looked up, his eyes a clear, intelligent blue. "Just a bit cold," he said quietly, "and I missed the lunch service at the shelter today." I looked down at my bag. Inside was my only food, a simple turkey and cheese sandwich I packed for the trip. Without hesitation, I took it out. "Here," I said, handing it to him. "It's not much, but it's yours." He stared at it for a moment, then at me, before taking it with a nod. "Thank you." And I remembered something my grandmother once told me. The measure of your character is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you. I turned toward him. "Excuse me, sir," I said gently. "Are you all right?" He looked up, his eyes a clear, intelligent blue. "Just a bit cold," he said quietly, "and I missed the lunch service at the shelter today." He shivered again, and I hesitated. Then, without overthinking, I removed my cashmere scarf, the one David had insisted I wear, and wrapped it around his shoulders. "You need this more than I do." He looked down at the scarf, then back at me. "You are a kind woman," he said, his gaze thoughtful and knowing. I smiled, wished him well, and hurried off, only then realizing I was now late. By the time I reached the main road, my heart was pounding with anxiety. I checked my watch. 5:12 p.m. I was 17 minutes late. I practically ran the rest of the way. My heels sinking into the soft grass leading up to the estate's massive. Two towering gates adorned with a golden S stood before me. I pressed the intercom button, my voice shaking slightly. "Ava Peters, here to see Mr. Sterling." There was a long pause. Then the gates opened with a slow metallic hum. As I walked up the long driveway lined with old oak trees, the mansion came into view. A grand, 3-story stone structure that seemed to watch me through its dark windows. And waiting for me at the top of the stairs was David, pale, pacing, and furious. The moment David saw me approaching, his face hardened. His usual calm was replaced by visible panic and anger. "Ava, where on earth have you been?" he hissed, his voice sharp and low as he rushed toward me. "You're 17 minutes late. 17! You know how he feels about tardiness. He'll see this as an insult." I tried to catch my breath. "I'm sorry, David," I said quickly. "I know. I was walking from the station and there was an old man sitting on a bench. He looked cold and hungry, and He cut me off, his expression one of disbelief. "An old man? A homeless man?" His voice trembled between shock and fury. "You were late to meet my father. My father, because you stopped to talk to a homeless man?" "I didn't talk," I said quietly. "I gave him my lunch. He hadn't eaten." David's eyes dropped to my neck, then widened. "Where's your scarf?" he demanded, his tone now icy. "The cashmere scarf I told you to wear." I hesitated. "I gave it to him," I admitted. He was freezing. He stared at me, speechless at first, then muttered in disbelief. "You gave away a $700 scarf to a stranger?" His voice rose with every word. "Ava, do you have any idea what tonight means? This isn't charity work. This is my father, the man who holds my future, our future in his hands. And you show up late, flustered, and without the one thing that made you look presentable?" His words stung, but beneath the anger, I could see what was really there. Fear. David wasn't angry at me. He was terrified of disappointing his father. I suddenly saw him not as my confident partner, but as a frightened man, still trying to earn approval. And instead of arguing back, I felt strangely calm. I had made my choice earlier. Compassion over appearances. If that made me unfit for the Sterling family, then so be it. Just then, the massive front doors opened. A tall butler in a black and white uniform stood before us, his face expressionless. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," he said formally. David straightened his tie, grabbed my hand, and whispered frantically, "Please, just let me handle this. Smile. Be polite. Don't mention the man. Don't mention the scarf. Just be perfect." We stepped inside. The foyer was vast and silent, with black and white marble floors that echoed with each step. The walls were covered in grand paintings, portraits of what I assumed were generations of Sterling. Museum of Wealth. The butler led us down a long, silent corridor. My heart pounded, steady and loud in my chest. I squeezed David's hand, hoping to calm him, but he was rigid, lost in his own dread. We stopped before a pair of tall, carved wooden doors. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the main dining room," the butler announced. From beyond the doors came a low, familiar voice, deep, calm, and faintly raspy. For a moment, I froze. I knew that voice, but it couldn't be. The doors opened. The dining room was enormous, a grand space centered by a long, polished mahogany table. that stretched nearly the entire length of the room. A glittering chandelier hung above, unlit, casting the room in soft twilight. At the far end of the table sat a single man. David leaned close, still whispering frantic instructions. Remember, firm handshake, eye contact, don't mention. But I wasn't listening anymore. My mind raced to deny what I was seeing. Expensive wool against a plain jacket. My cashmere scarf, the scarf I had given away. My breath caught. My body went still. I couldn't move. David tugged at my arm. "Ava, what's wrong?" he whispered urgently. "Come on!" Then he followed my gaze down the long table and froze. The color drained from his face. His mouth fell open. "Father?" he stammered, his voice breaking. What are you wearing? Are you all right?" The man at the head of the table looked directly at me, not at his son. Those same clear blue eyes that had looked up at me on that park bench now held warmth and recognition. "Welcome, Ava," he said kindly. "Please, come in, have a seat, and forgive my appearance earlier today. It's an old habit of mine." My mind struggled to process it. The shivering man I had helped an hour ago was Arthur Sterling, the man I had been so afraid to meet. David turned to me, his face pale. "That's the homeless man?" he whispered in disbelief. "That's who you were talking about?" Arthur finally looked at his son, his voice turning cool and sharp. "You look surprised, David," he said evenly. "You shouldn't be. You know better than anyone what I value most: character, integrity, and kindness. The qualities that can't be bought." He gestured to the long, empty table. "I've spent years testing people. Powerful men, wealthy families, ambitious heirs, all trying to impress. But most fail because they only perform." He sighed, a sound of quiet disappointment. Then his eyes returned to me, his tone softening again. "And today, this young woman, your fiancé, appeared. Late, nervous, fully aware she was being judged. And still she stopped." He paused, his gaze steady on mine. "She gave a stranger her lunch so that he would not go hungry. She gave her comfort so that another could be warm. She failed your shallow test of appearances, David. But she passed mine, the only one that truly matters." He smiled at me, the same kind smile I had seen in the park, and gestured to the chair beside him. "Now, Ava," he said warmly, "please sit. We have dinner to share, and a future to discuss." David stood frozen in silence, his father's words echoing through the vast room. The air in the dining room was heavy with silence. The only sound was the faint ticking of an ornate clock on the far wall. David's jaw was tight, his eyes darting between his father and me, as if searching for some way to regain control of the moment. But there was none. Arthur, still wrapped in my scarf, motioned to the butler, who stepped forward quietly and poured wine into crystal glasses. Then, with a simple nod, Arthur dismissed him. "Sit, both of you," he said gently. "We've had enough pretense for one evening." David hesitated, but obeyed. I followed his lead, my pulse still racing. The long table stretched between us, filled with elegant dishes that suddenly felt too grand, too distant from the con. Arthur took a sip of wine and leaned back in his chair. "You know," he began, his tone casual but edged with meaning, "I didn't become who I am by watching balance sheets or chasing titles. I learned by observing people, by seeing who they are when no one's watching." He turned his eyes toward David. "You've spent your whole life trying to meet my standards, son. You work hard, you're clever, you're ambitious. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that those traits mean nothing without empathy." David's expression faltered. "Father, that's not fair," he said quietly. "You raised me to succeed, to be strong, to never show weakness." Arthur nodded slowly. "Yes, and that was my mistake. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Arthur set his glass down. I built an empire by being ruthless, but I lost sight of what that taught you. You saw me value results, not people. You believed kindness was a weakness. And so, tonight, I decided to see if you'd inherited my blank, or if you'd chosen something better. He smiled faintly at me. Turns out, the better choice wasn't yours to make. David looked away, shame flickering across his face. I just wanted to make you proud, he murmured. Arthur's tone softened. And you will, one day, when you learn that pride means nothing if it costs you compassion. The silence that followed was long, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence of understanding, painful but necessary. Arthur looked back at me, his eyes warm again. Ava, I owe you an apology, he said sincerely, for deceiving you, for testing you without your knowledge. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything, sir. I just did what anyone should do. He chuckled lightly. Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Very few would have done what you did. You gave without expectation, without knowing who was watching. That kind of heart is rare. Then, to my surprise, he reached up and gently folded the scarf, laying it neatly on the table between us. I smiled. Of course! Arthur's gaze lingered on David for a long moment. You're a lucky man, he said simply. David looked down, his voice almost a whisper. I know, Father. Dinner continued, but the tone had shifted completely. The earlier tension had dissolved into quiet laughter, light conversation, and even the occasional story from Arthur about his own youthful mistakes. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel cold. It felt alive. When dessert arrived, Arthur stood, raising his glass. To Ava, he said, for reminding me and my son that humanity is not a performance. It's a choice we make, again and again. I blushed as David finally smiled, truly smiled, for the first time that night. To Ava, he echoed. We clinked glasses, and for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged at that table. Epilogue. 1 year later. A year later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, the Sterling Gardens were filled with laughter, music, and the scent of fresh flowers. It was our well. Arthur stood proudly beside David as best man, his expression softer than I had ever seen. He wore a tailored suit, and around his neck, folded with care, was the same scarf. My scarf. When the ceremony ended, he took my hands and whispered, I told you I'd keep it close. I smiled. It looks better on you. He chuckled. Perhaps, but it means more because of what it represents. David joined us, his arm around me, his demeanor calmer, humbler. He's been impossible since that dinner, he said with a grin,
the test that
always
reveals
quoting
who
you
we
whenever I
truly
get too
are.
serious. I was late for the most important meeting of my life, the moment I would finally meet my fiancé's father, a reclusive and famously difficult billionaire. On my way there, I stopped to give my only lunch and my cashmere scarf to a shivering homeless man on a park bench. When I eventually arrived, flustered and anxious, and stepped into the grand dining room of the mansion, I froze. The same man I had just helped was sitting at the head of the table. Before we get into what happened next, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to follow our channel for more engaging stories like this one. Now, back to that unforgettable day. The invitation hadn't really been an invitation. It was more of a summons. It came in the form of an email from a law firm, written with the precision and detachment of a court order. Mr. Arthur Sterling requests the presence of his son, Mr. David Sterling, and his companion, Ms. Ava Peters, for a formal dinner at his private residence.